Tonight, in night 2 of the Democratic debate in Detroit, Joe Biden solidified his position as frontrunner in the 30-30 presidential race. Bill de Blasio reminded us he won't be president, but you're kind of starting to get the impression he won't be mayor of New York for much longer. Cory Booker took advantage of being on stage in Detroit, a city that makes Newark look like Mayberry. Tulsi Gabbard reminded us that we don't know how to pronounce Hawaii. And Kamala Harris really leaned into Joe Biden's track record, but yet was shocked that anybody remembered anything she did over the last 20 years. Go easy on me, kid. The Trump Report Night 2 debate special starts now.
You're tuned in to AfterBuzz TV, the ESPN of TV talk. Now, let the buzz begin.
Oh, yes, that's right. Let's hear it for the boys. Let's give the boys a hand. Welcome to a very special Trump Report. I'm Christian Bladt, joined by our friend Drexel Hurd.
Oh my goodness! Hello, I am here.
It must be a big night if Drexel Hurd is here. And look, we're all out past our bedtime. It is 10:30 Pacific time, but we're here to bring you our thoughts on Night 2 debate. And of course, in the end, Scott Moore.
Yes, good to be here.
Thank
Even if
you.
it's late, it's great to be here.
Yes, even though it is late, there's a lot to really dive into and some minutiae we can get into, but big picture, overall thoughts. Drexel, you first.
On which
Just the
debates in general.
We're going to just talk about tonight. I think we'll see if we have time to touch on, conversationally, if last night comes up, that's
Sure.
fine. But we won't try to deal with the specifics of last night unless there's time at the end.
Yeah, I just posted on Facebook. I said, if you asked me today who I would vote for, I would vote for Elizabeth Warren or Kamala Harris. I think that there are some some things that Kamala Harris needs to certainly answer for, but I think she has done a really good job of setting herself apart from somebody like Joe Biden, and that's what you kind of saw tonight and in the last debate, in the first debate actually. But I also think that some other folks had a really good night. Joe Biden had an excellent night tonight. I think for all the attacks that came at him, he was able to not only deflect them, he was also able to answer for a lot of things. And it did not help that CNN positioned the questions like they did last night to go after Joe Biden like they did Senator Sanders. And that was unfortunate.
Yeah, I would say that Biden, a lot of his performance was strong, but he had those moments where, look, because of his age, you start to notice a little bit more when he stumbles over things, when he loses his place, but more importantly, when he is so quick to yield his time, when no one wants to yield their time, he's like, and one time it was like he hadn't even been interrupted yet. It's as soon as somebody speaks up, he's like, I'm done. Don't ask. Stop.
Sure, and I think that has a lot to do with the fact that
Biden out.
That I'm sure he has debate prepped enough to where he's like, I don't need to say a lot of stuff right now.
That's true.
Because this debate means very little.
And a lot of the people who kept going past the all right, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. It's like
Right.
I would get, even if they were making an important point, it would get annoying when they got to the third one. Right. Scott, overall thoughts on tonight? But you can talk about last night if you want. But in general, overall thoughts as we sit here right now.
I would say again that there were some people that had some good moments. I think tonight that I was not expecting. I thought Andrew Yang had a couple good things that he brought up. I think Kamala Harris had some issues tonight. I was surprised that she wasn't as prepared, but then the more I thought about it, I thought she really hasn't had a lot of real debate experience being a candidate, because of course when she ran for Attorney General was close in 2010 here in California. It was the closest with Republicans and Democrats at that point, but she cruised to re-election in 2014, and then when she ran for the Senate, there was really no real competition for her. So I do believe that she's got to strengthen her debate prep a little bit. I was very surprised by, I think Tulsi Gabbard even had a couple good moments there, and she really brought Harris, she brought her basically in there with some of her comments on her record, Harris's record as an attorney general. I think Biden had a better night tonight than the first night. I do think a lot of people piled up on him with the way the structure was, but of course he is the front runner, and in a way he was going to be a target, even though I think CNN did a poor job on how they were setting up both nights. But I felt he was going to be a target anyways after the first debates.
Yeah, sure.
I think it'd be very interesting. Hopefully there'll be a mix in September, which we can go into later, on maybe some of the people not being on the same nights. It would be interesting to see Warren with Biden. It would be interesting to see some other people have a chance to debate with each other. I do agree with you, though. There were some moments where I saw some of Biden's age come up here and there.
If he's in his 50s and he makes those mistakes, it's not really an issue, but it's kind of you can have a lot of issues about him, but that's really the one thing going into it. And he didn't see, I think Bernie's the same age, or at least.
No, Bernie's a little bit older.
Right. My point is with Bernie, you didn't really see that.
No.
In fact, you were like, did he have like 5 cups of coffee before he started? Because he was more Bernie than ever.
Well, and I hate to make an appearance thing because that really shouldn't be about. But again, it's almost like you feel like you see it more with Biden with his age, because whatever they're doing with his makeup on there, it just makes him look really old, and like he has a lot of makeup on, and then you see him do a couple stumbles here and there, which of course is kind of the Bidenism anyways. That's part of his Uncle Joe charm to some degree, but you start to see a little bit more, and it really makes him seem so much older. And it bothered me a little bit here and there personally as a voter, but overall I think he had a better night than he did the first time
and with
around.
Biden, obviously the most important thing is that he was in way too much of a rush to get hair plugs. If he'd waited like 10 years, they would have been so much better, but that's just the way he is. Drexel, I saw you had something on, you posted something, I believe it was on Facebook, but possibly Twitter, about how for Kamala Harris, there was kind of like one thing that she needed to be prepared for. And she didn't give a terrible answer, but she didn't give a great answer. And I think that was Gillibrand who went after her on that, wasn't it?
It was Tulsi Gabbard that went after her.
Right. So that was a great moment for Tulsi Gabbard.
It was the only moment that Tulsi Gabbard's ever had.
Well,
and probably
just
her
to
entire
interrupt,
career.
even though I asked you the question, I think that there's a lot of people on the stage both nights where they're like, okay, this is pretty close to the end for me. I have to make a name by taking on either Joe Biden or Kamala Harris is seen obviously not the front runner, but one of the upper tier, and I think that's exactly what that was by Tulsi Gabbard.
But I think with Tulsi Gabbard, I think that there is a line of attack like Kamala Harris did on Joe Biden in the first debate, and there is that was effective to catapult somebody to a certain level, and then there is a line of attack that is forgettable, but it still hurts a certain candidate, and that's what Tulsi Gabbard did. Tulsi Gabbard's attack on Kamala Harris is certainly not going to increase Tulsi Gabbard's standing in the polls, because if I was Kamala Harris, certainly I would have shot back, I don't need criminal justice reform ideas from somebody who's an Assad apologist. I would have said that from the stage, and that would have shut that down. I think Kamala Harris, as Attorney General, certainly should have said, at least my recommendation, and whether or not people agree with it, with the strategy, probably would have been something like, look, I was Attorney General. I am the state's top prosecutor. I have one job to do. I not only have to uphold the laws of the state of California, but the nation's laws, and I did that job effectively. If you don't like it, I stand by my record, and that's it. If she would have been unapologetic about her record as Attorney General, I think people would understand that. They might disagree with it. They might not like it, but at least she stood by her record as Attorney General, because if you're going to tout your record as Attorney General, then at least, and make that a part of your campaign, then the least you can do is say, look, this is what I did. I understand the flaws in that. I understand how people could be upset by that, but here's reasons why I did that, because I have a job as a prosecutor. It's like some folks have a problem with police, or some people have a problem with prosecutors in general. You either want the law to be on your side when you're a plaintiff, or you don't. You either want to follow the law or you don't. I think that there are certain things in Kamala Harris's record when it comes to, I know the criticism and certainly the feedback is, hiding certain prosecutorial things as Attorney General, or at least from her office, not necessarily from her, but she was the head of the office at the time, and being able to answer for that. But at the end of the day, I think that she would have probably fared better had she had a better answer on an issue that she knew out the gate was going to be her major issue. It's literally the only, if you ask anybody about Kamala Harris, as a criticism, that is the one thing that everybody brings up. It's like Andrew Yang in the first debate not being able to explain universal basic income as his signature proposal. If you cannot explain your signature proposal, then you probably shouldn't be on the stage. In this case, Kamala Harris could not and was unprepared to explain her criminal justice record as Attorney General, and that was pretty much a failure.
Yeah, and that's sort of what I was saying in general terms on the overview, was that I was surprised that she, even though she doesn't have debate experience, I was surprised that she wasn't more tightened up on that answer on why she did what she did as a prosecutor, because that is her biggest stumbling block, and I was very surprised by that. I think she does need to tighten it up. I think she needs to practice her debating skills a little bit more. But she did go on and say every single time how proud she was of her record and what she did, and which I thought was fine as sort of a counter, but it didn't quite explain well enough to me as a voter some of the criticisms, and she's going to have those for the rest of her run, for the presidency, and she's got to get better at that answer, and it's got to be more solid so that she doesn't get thrown off from Tulsi Gabbard, asking her a question like that. So I was surprised.
And that's what I'm saying. Like, if you are going to tout that record as Attorney General and say, I'm very proud of my record as Attorney General, then the least you can do is say, look, yeah, listen, there were certain decisions that were made that I'm not necessarily proud of, but they happened. They happened on my watch, and I learned from them, and here's what I'm doing next on criminal justice reform. I think the problem is some of these candidates is that they've never been able to return it back to the issue. They've been trying to defend themselves so much, and instead of saying, here's what I've learned from that, and here is my policy going forward. And somebody like Kamala Harris or Joe Biden or any of these major candidates has never been able to take it back to their policy. Elizabeth Warren's very good at that, but some of these major candidates have a little bit of problem doing that.
Yeah, and I think also this, I guess for lack of a better way to characterize them, the second-tier candidates, they don't expect to speak so much. And I think when they have one good line, they're like really quick to go back to it. I mean, with Yang reusing a line that was in the intro before they were actually introduced. It's like in his video is what I mean. So he goes right into what I'm an Asian who loves math, the opposite of Donald Trump. And by the way, big reaction from the crowd. So clearly they weren't watching.
That was I'm sure the Yang gang out there, but
yeah, and you definitely see some representation for you can hear some more vocal stuff. Our friend Chelsea did not appreciate my characterization last night, but I felt like last night's debate, Bernie had the best paid audience members because he had the best reactions, and it couldn't possibly have been because they believed in what he was saying. But yeah, that was last night. But you heard a little tonight. It was a little bit mixed, though. You know what I mean? I think you could tell that, like, oh my God, that's our guy. It's like when if you're at like a high school graduation, there's always like the one family that's like super excited that, and you hear them over anyone else. A couple comments in the chat from R. Scott Brown. All of these are from R. Scott Brown that I want to make sure we get to. One, it was a Biden pinata. Let's not overlook cognitive decline. It happens without regard to disease. And finally, Gabbard will get a highlight that isn't in her hair. And
her hair looks amazing, by the way.
No, I thought she looked great. I hate
and by the way, Lady Goth wants to point out, heads up to anyone new, Drexel really, really dislikes Gabbard. So she wanted to put that on the record.
No. First of all, I've never really talked about Tulsi Gabbard because I try not to talk about people I don't like very much. But listen, I think if and I said this to somebody earlier today because I was at a debate watch party about Tulsi Gabbard. If Tulsi Gabbard was not, if this is a couple years ago, and Tulsi Gabbard, if the Assad thing and her record on LGBT rights and her record on foreign policy was slightly different. She would be the Pete Buttigieg of this race right now. I think she's super polished. I think she could eventually have been president of the United States, but I don't know that a large swath of the American people would vote for somebody, certainly who has the record that Tulsi Gabbard.
Yeah, I 100% agree.
Is she a, obviously getting far down the road, is she a disadvantage in the VP slot? Could you do much better than her? What does she bring to the table? Is she someone to seriously consider for that?
I don't know that. Again, I think with what I said before, I think she would be a liability in certain aspects. I think that a majority of the Democratic Party certainly takes LGBT issues as a huge part of any candidates, any voter. In the way that they vote, and I don't know that Tulsi has the background that would make people feel comfortable with that. I don't. Again, she can say it's like Marianne Williamson and being and not being anti-vax, right? It's like she can say it all day, but we've seen it before, and I'm certainly somebody who is willing to acknowledge somebody's evolvement on certain things.
Sure.
We saw it with Barack Obama. We saw it with Hillary Clinton. We saw it with a lot of our favorite Democrats. But I don't know that somebody like Tulsi Gabbard has adequately been able to persuade people that her views have changed so much. And I think foreign policy, again, if she's going to tout her credentials as a military as somebody who is ready to be commander-in-chief because of her military background, having a mindset that is apologetic, kind of like Rand Paul, is not going to be in her favor as somebody who should be commander-in-chief.
Yeah, and I think the difference too with her, and I don't want to say because of Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton haven't been around for a long time and being able to kind of evolve on that, but she hasn't had the opportunity to even evolve because she's even younger than Pete Buttigieg. So I mean, she's very young. She doesn't have the deep enough record that I could say with confidence and comfort too that she's evolved into something where I'm like, yeah, she could, and I think it will happen for her. But there's too many liabilities that I think most voters would have against her being a mainstream candidate, even in the VP slot too. So I don't see that happening for her.
Speaking of Buttigieg, that is one of those things that takes me back to last night, and that's sort of the reminder that I guess he would be 37 when he was sworn in, and I think I finally found the thing that I like the least about him, and that's that he's only 37. I don't think I'm old enough for there to be a president younger than me.
Yeah.
I think
that's how I feel.
I think I'm not ready for that just yet. So he's gonna have to wait a little bit longer. But there was a lot that there were a lot of. I think that they did a good job presenting the issues. But let's briefly, Drexel, you had your thoughts on the way that CNN sort of ran the debates over both nights. They did focus too much on for lack of a better term, the all-star candidates. Did you feel like the questions they chose? I thought that there were a couple of times, and there was more last night. I think specifically Bernie chastised Jake Tapper for using the Republican talking points, but I think that's the way to ask questions. I thought that some of the questions were very pointed from the moderators. I think all of them did a decent job. I personally have an affinity for Jake, but I think he did actually do a really good job. I thought everybody asked tough questions, and they did ask tough questions of each other. But do you feel that they did a decent job in that point, and they just didn't spread the wealth among the candidates, or were there things that you felt like they should have spent more time on?
Yeah, listen, I think that they hit a lot of the major points that Democrats are very interested in: healthcare, immigration, climate change, foreign policy. I mean, those are the things we knew they were going to kind of ask about. Criminal justice reform. I think the problem became when CNN and the moderators would talk about somebody's specific policy. In this case, in the first debate, it was Bernie Sanders' Medicare for all policy and how it differed from everybody else's. Instead of letting every candidate say, "This is my policy on how I feel about health care," not in contrast to Bernie Sanders' proposal, but in an overall like, "Hey, listen, what is your proposal on health care? How do you feel about Medicare for all?" Not Bernie Sanders says this about Medicare for all. How do you feel about it? Or Joe Biden says this about criminal justice reform. How do you feel about it? Because the fact that there was a busing question tonight, on a night that nobody is like, it's like that meme that's like nobody, and then like CNN, busing conversation. Like that's how it was tonight. It just came out of nowhere, as if it was again. Not even as if it was designed to bait a conflict between Senator Harris and Joe Biden. Again, instead of saying, "Hey, look, we know that there are criminal justice problems with this." I'm glad they brought up the Eric Garner conversation because they put Mayor de Blasio on blast again.
Yeah, which I want to talk about that.
Yeah. But at the same time, you have to be able to give everybody a chance to answer about their policy, not their policy compared to somebody else.
Right, and sometimes it seemed like the only way to bring in one of the lower polling candidates was like, "Well, what do you think about this big name person's policy?" Scott, sort of a similar question on that. The debate, not the moderators, but also the interesting thing you and I were talking about beforehand is very flexible running time, because last night was 2.5. No, last night was 2:40. Tonight was 2.5. I think.
No, it was the opposite. Tonight was longer and.
Yeah. So not only are there do 20 people make the debates, but they're going to give us 5 hours of debate coverage. So I mean,
not to mention the pre-coverage.
Right. Exactly.
I think as someone who's even very avid political observer and enjoys that kind of stuff, I even felt that it could have been tightened up a bit. I think the structure was off again. Like Drexel says, I didn't like the way they were, and I know they were doing it because that's what we are now. That's why we have a reality TV star as president. It's because they want the conflict, they want to manufacture drama. But I think by doing that and then by keeping it so long that it actually kind of backfired on them, because it became so obvious that they're trying to set up this drama against the frontrunners, and it took away from everyone having a chance to really talk about their policies in a way, and then also keeping a little bit more succinct and tighter. Like MSNBC, I thought, even though they had some issues too, at least kept it a little bit tighter.
Well, those were mostly microphone issues, but
I mean, but they they kept it tighter. They had a couple more breaks in there that kind of broke it up a little bit, because there was a time like tonight that it went over an hour without a break, basically, and it just felt a little bit monotonous, and it would have been nice to have a little more breaks, a little more tighter, a little more of an opportunity to have everyone speak about their own
and
policies.
Also the candidates didn't eat both nights. The candidates didn't come out on stage for the first 20 minutes, and I was just like, why don't you start that at, well, what is it, 7:40 Eastern time, and then
so
get
on the
8 o'clock.
stage they just
but they didn't get introduced.
Yeah, so they did the national anthem and then all the other stuff,
Yeah.
and then so it would have been nice to have it just a little bit tighter, and just a better format and setup. So I'll be curious to see how Univision does it in September, and obviously I think a couple more people will probably drop out between now and then, or as the threshold gets higher and higher for being able to get in the debates. So it will be interesting. But yeah, I just tonight it felt like it kept going and going and going and going.
40 minutes of the conversation is centered around one issue, it's a problem. And 40 minutes of it was all on healthcare, and I get it. It's huge,
very important,
a very important issue. The problem again is when it's 40 minutes about one person.
Because it was basically, it wasn't the very beginning, but it was pretty early on that they spent all this time. It was on Kamala Harris's healthcare plan, and the point that I guess Joe Biden was the one to point out that $30 trillion is what it would cost in 10 years. My notes say $3 trillion, but
I think
I'm like, no,
that's
that's
$3
not right.
trillion.
I thought he said 30 also.
Yeah, see that.
I thought it was 30. It was some crazy
just
absurd
say
number.
It's $3
The
trillion.
30 sounds
and
crazy.
Yeah, but it was something crazy like that. It was some high number.
And,
I was like, what?
She sort of discounted a lot of what he said, but then that number came up again, and I'm like, wait, that's my takeaway though. Is like, is it really going to cost that much? And look, I think that a lot of people agree that healthcare is important, but it was a point that came up a lot last night, is this idea, and I thought it was really well framed last night, because obviously they're in Detroit, and it's like, well, all of our union workers who fought hard for their benefits, now they're going to have basically Medicare, and figuring out, I guess, a way to make people comfortable with the idea of, like, if you, I did make a joke about this last night, because it is the sort of the go-to for Republicans about Obamacare. There was this promise that if you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor, except actually it turned out you couldn't really keep your doctor if you wanted to. So the idea that if you like your health care, you can keep your health care, I think people are starting to think, like, wait a minute, no, I don't think that's what they mean.
Right.
And I think it's important to make that distinction, but you're absolutely right. The 40 minutes of it, it was very easy to sort of, and I wasn't even watching it, I was just listening to it on Sirius, and so my eyes glazed over, and but what do you think, Scott, what were the key points that they could have made and then moved on from that issue? Just of what was said in the 40 minutes, what do you think of the cliff notes they could have given us and then moved on to something different?
Well, I mean, I think part of the issue too, and I know it's part of the debate, was again, it was like this infighting between basically the two front runners there in this case, with Kamala and Joe Biden, but it just kept going on and on about the same things. Like you said, it was like they could have tightened it up a little bit, and they didn't do as good of a job wrapping people up that they could have, and they let other people keep talking and talking. Like you were saying, with that whole back and forth with Kamala Harris and Joe Biden about their plans, and then she kept bringing up Kathleen Sebelius, and and it was
because then it turned into like, well, Kathleen Sebelius just liked it, she didn't write it,
and that's what I'm saying. Like that kind of stuff, you could really, the moderators could have come in and said, okay, let's stick to the topic here, and not getting on into these whole side conversations that just didn't.
And
really
it also seemed like it's like comment, okay, rebuttal, okay, now you get a rebuttal to the rebuttal. But then it's like, now there's the rebuttal to the rebuttal to the rebuttal, and I was like, can we just stop? Like, let them talk about.
I mean,
let them talk about it afterwards.
Kirsten Gillibrand was like, "Oh, I didn't even." She was actually
she was surprised, exactly,
that she was going to be able to answer a question.
Yes, that was funny.
That was very funny.
That was.
But to answer your question, just about what people could have taken away from that, or at least could have said, and I did the quick thing on NPR this morning or yesterday where I was saying that at a certain point, we have to talk about healthcare as a moral issue. The problem that Democrats have is that we have allowed Republicans to capitalize on what they perceive and believe to be morally correct. If we said to somebody, and or for anybody who's very interested in or who believes in Medicare for all, right? I have to be able to say to that person, or they would say, okay, I believe in Medicare for all, and I would say, are you willing to raise your own taxes, which I'm pretty sure people get asked. Are you willing to raise your own taxes and go out of your way to pay for somebody else's X, Y, and Z? To pay for somebody else's health care? If the answer is no, in your own personal life,
right,
then you are not for Medicare for all. I mean, and that is a question that if you cannot answer that truthfully, then you're lying to yourself and you're lying to the other people around you. Because if you truly believe that you are comfortable saying to yourself, listen, I don't mind paying for Scott. Listen, if I got it, then you got it. But if you don't want to raise your taxes, if you don't want your money to go somewhere else for somebody else's health care, then you do not believe in Medicare for all. You do not believe in the things that you are saying because you have no interest in your neighbor benefiting from the things that you would also be helping to pay for.
But I think that is part of the issue in the fact that Republicans have that kind of winning strategy because they bluntly say, and basically a lot of people do tell me when I bring it up too, that they don't want to pay for other people and they don't want to pay for illegal immigrants, for their health care, and they bluntly say that, and that's part of the bigger issue. And I don't know how it's framed in a better way. I know that I thought there were a couple good answers tonight about bring up, which I've always said too, that it is a human right, not a privilege. I think that's a good first step, but I agree with you. But I think that's part of the problem, that a lot of people will bluntly say, no, I do not want to pay for another person's health care, and they're on their own, and it's their problem.
And to Scott's point, like if you say to somebody, I'm going to raise the government should pay for this. How do you think the government can pay for it? You got to raise taxes on people.
Yeah.
So, but the taxes got to come from you. Are you going to be able? Are you willing to not only pay for health care in your taxes? And I know Bernie talks about Medicare for all, people saying, okay, well, you're going to raise, and Elizabeth Warren didn't have a really good answer on whether or not she was going to raise taxes. I was very surprised that she just didn't come out and say, yeah, your middle class taxes are going to be raised. Like, sure.
Well, I think everybody just tries to figure out the way,
like,
the way
Bernie's
to
the only
not.
person. Listen,
Right.
I try not to give Bernie too many compliments. However, I thought he had a really great debate performance last night. But what I'm saying is that if somebody say, yes, you're going to raise middle class taxes, but you're going to pay less in health care. I understand that piece of it, and I think most people do, but nobody ever wants to, because everything else gets raised across the board. The other moral problem is on doctors and hospitals. If you become a doctor and you're only in it for the money, then that is a moral issue. If you are a doctor and you're not saying, my number one priority is to help people and not to make money,
Right.
then that becomes a moral issue. Then you can't say to me, I want to be in it to just do the job. Because what happens is you got to pay for it. People are like, well, somebody said, well, doctors won't want to go to medical school
I've heard that
to do
too.
that.
Exactly.
And I'm like, well, that doesn't make any sense because doctors should not go to
Right.
medical school to make money. They should go to medical school to help people, and then they would say, well, they got to pay for they got to pay for education. Okay, well then we should make education free for those who are public servants, those who are doing that, and the only way to do that is again to pay at higher taxes and making sure that all those things happen. And if you are unwilling to do any of that, then don't come to me and tell me that you want Medicare for all, free college tuition, free anything, free this, that, and the third. If you're not willing to pay for it.
That was the point I wanted to transition to. Is like, tell us how you're going to pay for all of these things, and it would be a little novel for politicians with any letter in parentheses next to their name to just be honest and tell us. But it's great that you want there to be Medicare for all, and that you think that everyone who can go to college for free. And if you've already gone to college, Bernie's going to just open the checkbook and erase your college debt. 10 years too late for me, but for everybody else, that'll be great. But it just explain how you're going to pay for it, because I think that a lot of people will hear these things, and we talked a lot about this last night with Chelsea and Tamara, that, look, you have your diehard, hardcore Trump base that they're not for any of this, but you definitely have people that are independents, moderates, somewhere in the middle, who are kind of looking for a reason maybe to not vote for Donald Trump again. They voted for him for whatever reason last time. And, they're like, well, these things are okay, but I really don't like this stuff about him. So how do you win them over if you just say like, oh yeah, well, you know what, Kamala Harris has $3 trillion, but we'll figure it out. That's not till 2 years after she's done being president, so she doesn't have to worry about it.
Right, and so I don't want anybody to take away from what I said as like me not supporting free college. Like
no, it's just tell us how you're going to play for
saying,
it.
Look, if you are unwilling to do this, it's like going to church and acting like a good Christian, and then not being a really great Christian.
Well,
do you know what I mean?
It's like you go to church, so you think you have a pass now,
Right,
because you went and did it, and now you're like, okay.
I don't.
It's like I went to church, so I'm going to go to the brothel in the afternoon.
Right.
They definitely counteract each other.
And then you see that in a lot of Republican politicians. And,
going to brothels, yes, you do see that.
And listen, and using the tap function on Grindr and a lot of things. So, like, I think that those are the people who talk a really great game. But it's and I say this, I just got elected as vice president of Stonewall, Democratic Club here in LA, and I said, look, and I told the membership, I said, look, if you are going to come to me and you're going to say we need to be involved in X, Y, and Z, and you're unwilling to step up and volunteer for those things, then you can't come to me and expect me to want to extend the resources to do that. And the same thing goes for any of these big proposals. If you are unwilling yourself to do something for somebody else, or it's like voting. If you don't vote, then you have no reason to criticize what's going on. And so I say that same thing across the board to any other policy. If you are unwilling to help the person next to you, then please don't come to me and tell me that I should be supporting something because you're unwilling to do it on the other side.
I get where you're coming from, but if you're trying to expand the base to get some of those people that might be, like Christian was saying, the independents or moderate Republicans, and they hear that, and they hear about raising taxes to the middle class, or they hear about my money's now going to go pay for an illegal immigrant's hospitalization, or I'm sending my kid to college and paying a ton of money for it, and I want them to be a doctor to make tons of money, and that's basically what they want them to do. It's like, well, how do you convince those people that might be on the line that are fed up with Donald Trump to now come over and vote for those people that are, I don't want to say they're innately greedy, but they're part of the, like, oh, I do want to be a doctor to make money, or I don't want to be paying for other people, but I might be interested in Medicare for all, or at least a public option. If so it's like it's expanding the base that I think but as Democrats had lost back in 2016. And how do you get some of those people back, especially if they're listening tonight? And it just goes on and on. It's like, how do we make it succinct and clear to say this is why we want to do this type of stuff for, let's say, for insurance and get the drug prices down and expand the Medicare. And to me, like I always say, it's good to have the community be insured, because as I'm paying for your insurance, you're paying for Christian's insurance. By everyone collectively paying, it keeps all of our costs down. So I do think it has to go back to the person who feels that they're going to be positively affected by it. And I said, if your community's healthier, that means there's more people that are going to be able to work, and they're not going to be dependent on government handouts and other things. And as a community, we're stronger and healthier. So if illegal immigrants are being taken care of, that's less of tax bills that we're now paying for the ER to cover these people that need help, or any other types of people that need help that aren't insured. By having everyone insured, it helps collectively, just like everyone being able to get a public school education, everyone knowing they can call 911 and the police, or those type of things that we hold are dear as Americans across the party lines. I think is important, just to be able to kind of expand the map and say, how does it affect me, as selfish as it sounds, to be able to expand that map a little bit to people that are listening, rather than, you need to expect that you need to help these other people, and if you don't want to do it, then don't complain. I think sadly we've moved too far down that path now with people that are going to be very self-centered and want to know what's in it for me, which is why they're like, great, we can get free college education, great, we can get we can get all these goodies. And that's where Republicans come back with the argument about that, and like, how are we paying for it and everything. So I think we just have to have a better argument as to why we're doing it and how it affects you personally, and how that down the line affects everyone else. And
we were talking earlier about how some of the line of questioning by the moderators was targeted towards one of the front runners. There was a very specific moment in the conversation that I feel like, because it came after a commercial break, I feel like it was partially inspired by the protesters early on, who were talking about, they were essentially, and I did have to look up what they were saying, because you couldn't really hear them, but they were talking, it was in reference to Eric Garner's death. The police officer, I guess his name is Pantaleo, he's still on the force. So the police force in New York. So obviously that's something that you get to throw to de Blasio. And he was probably like, wait a minute, I'm polling at like 1%. Why is everybody ganging up on me like here in Detroit today? But it was a very important issue to be brought up. I was surprised it came up, and I was like, did it really only come up? Did they only think of it because of that? Or were they ready with that? And I think that he didn't really do a good job handling those questions. I don't know that he's done a good job at all. And so, well, let's talk first about that. How did you think he handled that? I'll ask you first, Drexel.
Sure. I think one of the smartest things that Bill de Blasio said was, look, the Justice Department came down on us and said, we cannot do X, Y, and Z. I think that gave him a little bit of cover. I think what we do know, it's like watching like Batman and stuff like that, where who has the power in a big city, which is the police force, the commissioner, and the police union. and I think that's something that people forget. I know here in Los Angeles, with with a couple of certain cases involving some very wealthy Democratic donors, and the deaths of black men at their hands as well in West Hollywood. That is certainly something that Jackie Lacey, our DA, is having to deal with right now, and that Eric Garcetti is having to deal with. And I think when you get into cases like that, the police have a lot more. The police union has a lot more power than I think people give them credit for. When it comes to how they interact with the mayor of a big city, and so I think, but I think in the case of Bill de Blasio, like I said, he was able to buy himself a little bit of cover in terms of throwing it back on the Justice Department. But I think he's in the same situation that Pete Buttigieg had in his city as well, which was saying, look, I did everything that I could, and here is the bottom line. I don't think these big city mayors are ever going to throw their police forces under the bus because they in case they got to go back to their cities. They're certainly never going to do that, and I think it's at the expense of their campaign. In that case, so either you're going to go all in or you're not, and I don't think that anybody is ever going to say that their police chief should be fired. In this case, Kirsten Gillibrand said, "Yeah, I would have fired. My goodness,
that's all right.
I would have fired him." And I'm sure she would have said exactly that. But she said, "Listen, I would have fired him." But she also doesn't have to answer to a city.
Well, that's the thing. That's what I was. It's easy for her to say that she would have. But I thought that her involvement in this was definitely a little like piling on. But I do think it was a good moment for her. What did you think about this whole issue coming up, Scott?
No, I kind of just recapping what you both said. I was surprised it came up. I was glad it came up, but pretty much like Drexel said, I was just thinking of Mayor Pete and how he had to respond. But with the big city, it is a lot different with the power of the police, and in that sense, I don't want to say a mayor is more of a figurehead. I don't want to give de Blasio, too much credit here, but in the sense it is, and I think the Justice Department answer, I agree with you. When I listened to it, I was like, that was a little bit of a cover. I still thought his answer overall was pretty clunky, but I actually thought, besides that issue, he was slightly better tonight than the debates last month, because I felt like the debates last month, he came in like this awkward, towering bully against everybody that just came across really
a New Yorker.
Yes, but the stereotypical loud, interrupting bully. Just it was really bad for him that first debate, and I thought now in this debate he was a little bit more controlled and he had slightly better answers, which isn't giving him again a lot of credit, especially where he's polling and everything. But I will give him the credit that he does deserve on that. I thought he did better tonight on the debate overall. I think his answer was clunky. But it was, like you said, it's a very difficult question to answer, especially when you have to go back to the city and you have to deal with these people on a day-to-day basis. And I think, honestly, he knows he's not going to be president, nor is he going to make it very far in the process right now. So he does have to think of the long-term game, which is that he has got to go back to New York and attempt to govern in the rest of his second term and deal with these people, so in the police unions and everything else, and answer to them. But hopefully, he'll be able to have a better response down the line if he gets asked again, because it was clunky.
And we'll move on from de Blasio in a second, but the other moment was when he really dug in and like 3 times tried to get Joe Biden to answer a question, which I think is good the second time, and then the third time it's like, he's not going to answer you. Just like, okay, we get it. We know what you're trying to do.
Joe Biden's like, listen, you're so far down the line.
I know. He's like, I can't even see you.
I don't even know what's going on.
And you're so tall, and I still can't see you because you're so far down there.
I think that's what you'll see in a lot of the folks' answers. And Kamala Harris did the same thing on healthcare, right? She has not been very clear on her position on healthcare, partly because she represents a state that overwhelmingly supports Medicare for all, with a party in the California Democratic Party that overwhelmingly supports Medicare for all. If Kamala Harris doesn't come out victorious in this, she has to run for re-election, obviously, in a few years. So she's not going to say anything that could jeopardize her re-election standpoint. And I think that, again, going back to a lot of these folks that got to go back home after the fact, like Marianne Williamson, she's trying to sell some books. And
Beto's got to go back to the
Beto's gotta
skate park.
Beto should be running for United States Senate.
Yes, he should.
Steve Bullock should be running for United States
Yes,
Senate.
he should.
A lot of these folks should be running for United States
Hickenlooper
Senate.
should be running for United States Senate.
Listen, should be definitely running. So
Yes.
I think that a lot of these folks eventually got to go back home. They're trying to increase a little bit of their street cred right now. It's a waste of our time. But they're certainly not going to shake the tree too much until they get past Iowa and New Hampshire, and then Super Tuesday, when we actually will probably find out who's going to be the nominee.
Exactly. You don't want to get too deep in the policy weeds right now and be stuck with that and have it playing over and over again.
We'll take a couple extra minutes here because one of the things I wanted to talk about was late in the debate was, you feel like obviously this is the Democrats' debate, so you're appealing to people who will ultimately vote in Democratic primaries. I think as a strategy, I don't know, excuse me, how each of you feel about this, but it seemed like everybody. Well, I don't know. I don't think anybody at least spoke up and said that they didn't support some degree of impeachment hearings or obstruction of justice charges. Kamala Harris was very strong about it. Castro got in the nice dig that I think Scott might have enjoyed, calling Mitch McConnell Moscow Mitch, And I kind of was wondering what you thought of the answers just in general, and what you think because there seems to be a pretty clear divide within the party as to what the best strategy is with this. So Scott, I'll ask you first. What did you think of the way that these candidates handled it, and what do you think ultimately should be done by the party in terms of impeachment? And for fans of the show, we always check on the impeachment clock to see where it is, and it's kind of been stuck for a long while.
Yes, it has been.
Clock.
Yeah.
I mean, look, exactly. It's like the doomsday clock. I mean, but there's definitely a fissure here in the party on what to do, and you heard kind of both sides in the debate tonight, and some did bring up some good points about at this point that we've just got to beat Donald Trump and just the timeline, and I've said this on the podcast in the past too, is like we're squeezing up on the timeline here and being able to effectively do it. However, not doing anything and allowing it just to go away does play into Donald Trump's hands, because it makes it seem like the Democrats are not going to stand up for him, and you have a lot of people in the base of the party that are very passionate about the fact that he's done wrongdoing, and that at least as it's going to be more of a symbolic thing, because we know the Republicans are not going to do it in the Senate. But at least if the impeachment inquiry can go through and you can at least do it without it being too much of a distraction, it would be helpful not only for the party, but I think just for the public at large, because the longer that you don't do anything about it, the more you're basically saying, well, then, he didn't do anything wrong. And I think that sets a bad example, not only for this particular president, but for future presidents. So, there's two sides to it, because some of the people tonight had said in the debate, oh, look, if you do it, then you play into his hands of being like, oh, look, they're just being distracting and they're just trying to push this agenda without actually governing. But I think that the ones that said, look, if you did the impeachment inquiry, you're able to then put it back to Moscow Mitch, basically, and let him stop there, and now it looks bad that the Republicans didn't do anything about it, because if we don't do anything about it, then it just sits there and it looks like he didn't do anything wrong. So you're going to have him lie in the general campaign anyways, one way or the other, and he's going to say, if we do it, then he's going to come up with lies. If we don't do it, he's going to come up with lies by saying he's exonerated, so it doesn't really matter. But it was a good question that was brought up, but you can definitely clearly see that we're all not on the same page with this at this point.
And Drexel, your thoughts on the same issue?
Listen, I think it's what Nancy Pelosi has said. Listen, we can walk and chew gum at the same time, and I think that. But the other strategy is that we know that the fall is the time. September, October is the window. After that, there's no window.
Right.
So Democrats have to make a decision. Nancy Pelosi, I don't even know where Chuck Schumer is. I don't even know if he's still in the Senate anymore.
I know, right? But it's very tight. That timeline.
I have not seen him.
I know.
I've not seen him in months.
It's a
I
good
don't
point.
know where he is. But I also think that anything that goes, any impeachment inquiry, any impeachment hearings will be at the detriment of the Democratic nominee, and I think Nancy Pelosi and the House Democrats certainly have to ride the line of not taking the attention away from the Democratic nominee while upholding the Constitution as the oversight body. And I think that's that is the line that Nancy Pelosi is trying to ride right now. I'm sure the Democratic candidates are certainly saying, please, if you're going to do it, you better make sure it is airtight. And I think that's what Nancy Pelosi has said. She said, listen, and she said it the other day after the Mueller hearings, which was, things are going out through the court right now. I want things to be airtight. I don't want any daylight. That is what we're going to do. That is the strategy. Because what happens is that if we do this, it will either hurt us, or it will be such it will hurt us early, or it will be such a distraction that it will hurt the nominee come June and July of next year. So
yeah, it's a very fine line, but we do have to make a decision and not have this back and forth. Because like you said, once we get into the fall, that's why I said the timeline is so tight right now that we've got to start focusing on the election, and and that's where the American people would say he's out. So.
One final thought from the chat. Our Scott Brown says they can walk and chew gum at the same time, but they got to put the gum in their mouth. So thank you. For
yes.
and thank you for everyone who stayed up late, or if you're watching the archive, go ahead and leave your comments afterwards. We'll be back at our regular time next Tuesday at 4 Pacific, 7 Eastern. But until then, Scott Moore, where can people find you?
They can find me on Twitter, trying to tweet back to Moscow Mitch and the Orange Clown himself at SMan80. That's SMan80.
And Drexel, where do people find you?
At Drexel Hurd.
And you can find me at Christian DMZ. That is all the time we have for tonight, but thanks so much, everyone. We'll see you next Tuesday at 4 Pacific.
Bye.
Our founder, Kevin Undergaro, and me, Maria Menounos, would like to thank you for tuning in to AfterBuzz TV. Remember, we're not just the first, we're the biggest in the world, and we're the only destination for all your favorite TV shows. Whatever you crave, we've got it. So go to AfterBuzzTV.com and check out our lineup. Buzz you later.
The views expressed herein are those of the hosts only and do not necessarily reflect the views of AfterBuzz TV or its owners or principals.